Being a regular old four-wheel drive ute doesn't really cut it anymore. Even if you are a top spec expensive ute, you kind of want to have a little bit extra these days, and that is the case here with the Mazda Bt-50. Normally, this is just a regular Mazda Bt-50 SP, which is a high specification grade in the range, but now this is a Pro, so we've ticked a big option in this car. It's a little bit over $7,000, but it adds upgraded aftermarket sourced suspension, different wheels, and a light bar, and a couple of other things. But the big question is it worth it? Does it make this Bt-50 better, and is it worth your hard-earned money? Let's have a closer look. The high-spec Mazda Bt-50 SP is priced from $67,990 drive away, but adding the Pro Pack on top does give another $7,668 to the asking price. However, final pricing will vary state by state in Australia when you include the optional Pro Pack, so you're well into that $70,000 bracket for this vehicle here. The Pro Pack gives you Old Man Emu Nitro Charger Plus suspension from ARB, a Light Force LED light bar behind the grille, black 18-inch alloy wheels that are unique to the SP Pro, and some decals down the side. This comes on top of some other SP goodies like a manual roller cover, tub liner, and tow bar at the back, along with a sailplane style sports bar and a combination of gloss black and grey exterior accents. Powering the Bt-50 is a 3-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder diesel engine, which makes 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters. This runs through a 6-speed automatic transmission with a part-time 4-wheel drive system. There's also a low-range transfer case and locking rear differential. Here's the interior of the Bt-50 SP, and the Pro treatment doesn't really extend to in here, but still, it's a pretty nice place to be, I think. One big thing about the SP are the seats. You've got the same electric adjusted heated seats up front here with leather, but we do have a bit of color differentiation going on here just to set it apart a little bit, and it's echoed up on the dashboard. And you know what? It's pretty good in here. I don't know if it's the best in segment in terms of being a top spec four-wheel drive ute. I'd be looking at Ford Ranger. I'd be looking at Volkswagen Amarok as well in that regard, but this does look and feel pretty good. It feels quite solid. Now, in terms of practicalities, in terms of power, we've got one USB power outlet there. That's for your smartphone mirroring on this 9-inch infotainment display. There's one extra 12-volt power outlet there as well. No wireless charging, but you do have this bin in here that'll fit your phone in there or your wallet and things like that. 2 cup holders towards the back, decent sized center console, and you do have 2 glove boxes, which is pretty handy. So one on top, one down the bottom. You can fit a fair amount of stuff in there, but the bottom one, well, that's mostly your owner's manual and all that sort of thing. You do, however, miss out on the slide-out cup holders that you do get in an Isuzu D-Max. So if you're a big fan of carrying lots of drinks around, that's one thing in the negative column for this Bt-50 in comparison to the twin. Now, this infotainment, as I said, it's 9 inches in size, and you've got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on there. Digital radio, AM and FM and all those things. The operating system is a little bit basic, I think, in comparison to others in this segment. This is one area I feel where development is moving so quickly, and you look at the best in this segment in this regard. Once again, it's Ford Ranger, it's Volkswagen Amarok. They offer a lot more in terms of screen size, but also processing speeds, and also just the operating system that actually does all of the jobs available in this system is better than what you get here. But that being said, it's not too bad. Plug your phone in, do your mirroring, and it does the job well enough. Further down, you've got piano style buttons for your air conditioning dual zone climate control in this model, and then you've got a analog set of dials up front. Tacho and speedo, fairly old school I suppose, does the job. It's not digital like you do get in some other utes. And then you've got a small trip computer display in front of you there that runs through a few different things, similar to most other multifunction displays. Nothing special, once again, does the job. This is the second row of the Mazda Bt-50, and it's one of the better in the segment in terms of space overall, because this is a reasonably big ute in the segment in terms of length and wheelbase, and it affords just a bit of room for people jumping in the back here. This is something that isn't always the strength of a four-wheel drive ute. Now, that's my driving position up front there. I'm a little bit under 6 foot tall, and I do sit reasonably close to the steering wheel. So I've got a fair amount of room there left over at the moment. Most people, that seat might be back a little bit further, but for reference, that is pretty decent. Headroom, is okay as well. We've got air vents here, we've got a single USB power outlet, that's handy to have. Plus we've got one little 4 kilo hook there for hanging things off, maybe take away food or curry or something like that. But otherwise, this is pretty comfortable and good for the segment. I always say this, but a medium-sized SUV will be better for family duties, and a large SUV will be better once again in terms of overall space. But for a dual-purpose vehicle that's got a big load space in the back, this is actually pretty good. There's also some handy space under the rear seats for fitting in some smaller bits and bobs on that road trip you want to go on. Plus, you can also keep these seat bases flipped up for some extra load space or upholstery preservation. Let's have a look at the business end of the Bt-50 SP Pro. It's not a whole lot different going on here, but there are some SP additions worth talking about. And number one is this roller cover. It's not an electric roller cover like you might get in a Hilux or a Ford Ranger for that matter, but it's still pretty good. Press this button down, a little bit noisy, roll it forward. I can pop this tailgate down, and you can see that that loads into a cassette right there at the back of the tray. So you do still get a really nice usable tray for most of the time, but you can pull that over and give yourself a little bit of security and a little bit of weatherproofing as well. It's not perfect though. You do miss out on those tie down points at the front there. So instead of having 4, you only get 2. So if you want to put some big bulky stuff in here and you want to tie it down, you're going to be a little bit limited in that regard. Now I'll just pull that closed to shut. Having the roller cover installed on this Bt-50 SP gives you the indication that this ute is tended towards the lifestyle buyer more than the hardcore tradie or off-roader or something like that. This is a handy thing to have in terms of throwing the groceries in, the pram, other things like that. But if you do want to lock this up, it can be done. However, it is a little bit fiddly. This roller cover has its own key. So you're gonna put that in there like so, turn that. Now that doesn't open, but this tailgate, that still opens. And even if you lock the car on central locking, that tailgate still opens. So you've got to take out the key from your fob, stick it in there, and then turn it around. Now, that is actually pretty secure, but there's a few steps there. It's not as nice as a central locking setup that you get in other utes in the segment. So it's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, let's open this up again. Pull that down, do this one, a little bit of a process. There we go. We do have a tub liner that is great to see in a ute, and you can also see this plumbing in the side there. That is to try and channel away a bit of the water that will land on the back of this car if it's raining or something like that. And it is reasonably waterproof in here. Maybe not 100%, but it is pretty good for most applications. Firstly, let's touch upon some of the more familiar aspects of this Bt-50, and that's the powertrain. So we've got a 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine up front there. That is an Isuzu sourced engine, because don't forget, this is effectively a twin under the skin, this Bt-50 with the Isuzu D-Max. And you've got a 6-speed automatic gearbox there, torque converter unit that comes from Aisin, and that's used in a wide variety of applications. You've got a part-time 4-wheel drive system here. It's not as sophisticated as some of the permanent all-wheel drive setups or the selectable ones that you get in other places. However, what we've got here, it does the job well enough, I think, and it's got the advantage of being mechanically simple for those people, I suppose, who want to own this vehicle for a really long time and perhaps have a little bit less cost in terms of maintenance and repairs over, say, a decade or something like that. This setup is quite good. And this engine, it doesn't win any awards for being the most refined, and it doesn't win any awards for being the most powerful, but it's pretty good. It's got a great reputation for reliability, this engine. I can't say for sure whether this will be 100% the most reliable engine out there, of course. There are so many variables that come in with that, but Isuzu have been making very reliable and very well respected turbo diesel engines for many years now, and this is the next generation of that. You tend to think that, well, if you're a betting man, I suppose this would be a pretty good unit to own over the long term. The trade-off there, I suppose, is that you're just getting a little bit more gruffness in terms of the driving experience. It's a little bit more rough, a little bit more ragged around the edges, a bit less polished in comparison to other diesel engines in the segment. But now to the less familiar aspects of this ute, and that is absolutely the suspension. So we've got ARB, Old Man Emu, Nitro Charger plus shock absorbers, and they're matched to Old Man Emu springs front and rear as well. So you get a bit of a suspension lift here, but you've also got an upgraded suspension setup that's definitely more durable and more suited to things like four-wheel driving, loaded driving, a bit more abuse and rough and tumble. But in terms of the ride quality around town, it's not overly stiff. I was a little bit worried that this would be too stiff for everyday usage, but it feels reasonably close, I think, to a regular Bt-50. There's not a huge amount of difference in terms of the driving experience. I think bumps, big bumps in particular, are handled a little bit nicer by this suspension here. It's just got a little bit of an edge of plushness that the regular Bt-50 suspension doesn't have. But being a bigger shock absorber, coming from ARB, this will be a better shock, I think, over the long term. And the springs as well. I mean, a lot of people want to take these cars off-road straight away, and they'll probably want to throw out that standard suspension as soon as they can. This is done off the showroom floor, so there's certainly a convenience aspect there, but you are paying a little bit more for the suspension in comparison to what you would do if you just rolled into an ARB and paid for it directly, so keep that in mind. I do love the lazy torque of this 3-litre 4-cylinder engine. It never feels like it's really stressed or working hard, but one advantage of it, I think, otherwise, is the decent fuel economy you get out of it. It's a bigger engine, it's a 3-litre engine, but we're averaging around 7.7 to 8 litres per 100 Ks, which is a pretty good number, I think, for this car. Now, we have been doing a fair amount of highway driving in that mix, so if you're driving more around town, more loaded driving and that sort of thing, that number will certainly rise. But still, being a long way off 10 litres per 100, I think, is a pretty good place to be. So in summary, I think this Bt-50, it's definitely not the best in class overall in terms of the way it drives and rides and performance and that sort of thing. But you've got to say this powertrain is fit for purpose for a 4-wheel drive ute, especially for someone who wants to own one long term. I think the suspension is certainly an upgrade, although you are paying a little bit for it. And the Bt-50, yes, it's not the best, but it's still a really solid option, I think, in the segment. We wanted to find out more about the suspension of this Bt-50 SP Pro, so we headed to Nepean Landscape Supplies in Western Sydney to borrow a 750 kilo bag of sand. And once we got that loaded in and secured, we got back on the road. And we've gone for a bit of a drive, and I'm looking for rougher roads here. I found some dirt roads as well out in the western suburbs, and although the bad things about this car when it's loaded up, the back end does really sag down quite noticeably there. You still do have some bump stop spacing, so the car isn't right down on its haunches completely, and it might not look great, but the ride quality actually isn't too bad. Now, one thing you do need to do when you load this car up is increase the tyre pressures into the back, up to 300 kPa in fact. So do that, and that does help balance things out a little bit, and that puts a little bit more strain on the suspension. But although the springs are a bit soft, I've got to say these dampers feel really good. I've got nice control over the back here, even though the spring rate is clearly just not set out for 750 kilos of weight. If you wanted to do this all the time, you'd have to beef up those springs quite a bit, and maybe the dampers as well. But as we're driving here at the moment, these dampers feel actually pretty good. And then other stuff is really typical for the Bt-50, as it goes for the Isuzu D-Max as well. This engine, it feels nice and relaxed. It's nice and torquey. It doesn't feel like it's stressed at all, and it gets moving pretty well. It really feels like a true workhorse diesel engine in a ute like this, I think. It's not about high revs, it's not about peak power, but it's got that nice surge of torque just where you need it. And so, although this suspension does improve this Bt-50 Pro over a regular Bt-50, is it enough to justify the cost? That one is a little bit trickier to justify, I think. You won't get the same easy warranty coverage as you do with this Pro Pack when you buy it off the showroom floor, but on the flip side, you do have so many options to choose from to really tailor it to your needs and tastes, and you'll probably find something that's a little bit more cost effective as well. I think one word that sums up the Bt-50 is solid. It feels like a really solid offering in the 4-wheel drive ute segment, but at the same time, it's not really the best in any one real discipline. You can get other utes out there, especially at this kind of price point, that feel a bit more plush, they're a bit more refined as well, and they have a bit of extra technology thrown in. Time does move really quickly in this ute segment, especially as it's gentrifying and moving upmarket so quickly. But in saying that, if you wanted to own a ute for a really long time, I would be looking at this Bt-50 or an Isuzu D-Max quite closely. Now, would you choose the SP range? I'm not so sure. And would you go for the SP Pro pack for over 7 grand? Once again, I'm not so sure. The suspension, it has worked well. I do like the damping. The springs, well, we found the limit of those today, I think, with the load on board, but hey, they've done pretty well. It is a quality aftermarket suspension setup there, but you can get that in a lot of other places as well. So, solid offering. I do like it, but at the same time, I think there are better choices out there. Now, one small favor to ask of you. If you do like this video and you do want to see more of these in the future, give us a thumbs up on the video and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to know all the details about this Mazda Bt-50 SP Pro or any other new car in Australia, head on over to Drive.com.au.